Yes, Boston is home to winning sports teams and elite universities. But some might say that there are two Bostons.
If you look at City Hall, no one's talking about that specific racial and historical component that Black people are the ones that are being removed.
There's a huge significant difference in lived experiences, and we know this because of the wealth report. We're at $8.
This whole plan of gentrification isn't a new concept. In every city you go into in the Northeast, they kept moving Black people out of the inner city. So it's a plan. It's been in place for a long time.
While the displacement isn't as bad as 1963, it hasn't gotten much better now.
It's by design that they've created spaces where we are no longer seen anymore. They're wiping us out one community at a time, and they're getting away with it. This is gentrification. Franklin Park has been a place where we have built community, and all these things are at risk.
Why is the mayor willing to throw herself on this sword, do or die, for this project? It's not about soccer. It's about the additional profits that can be made in this entertainment complex.
It's a disrespect that you would take public parkland and then give it to a private group to control it.
And this project is Emmett Till's mama pulling back a curtain. And if people don't look at what's behind that curtain, it's coming to them.
What is going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning in to this very special live stream segment of For the People podcast. And of course, I am, as always, your humble host, Niko House. Today, I have for you a very special guest here to talk about a very special and powerful documentary. Somebody that most of you, if not all of you, are already very familiar with from her show, Sabby Sabs, Sabrina Salvati. Everybody, welcome her back to the show. What is going on, Sabs? How you doing?
Hey, Niko. How are you? And congratulations.
Thank you very much. Oh, it's crazy up in here. It's crazy. It's a madhouse. I'm okay. We surviving. my little boy is going crazy because he's halfway jealous because of the baby girl, and they be having their little crying competitions. When one hears the other cry, the other one has to try to cry even louder. It's been crazy up in here, but it's all love. I can't complain. I love being a daddy, even when they be driving crazy. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Finally getting a breather a little bit. I've been crazy busy this year, but finally.
Hey, I can see that. I mean, this documentary, Sabs, I got to tell you, it was very powerful. And like I said, I think that the title was very fitting because, we talk about gentrification and we talk about redlining. But I mean, the events that you described and that the others that you interviewed describe in your documentary, it's literally erasure of the Black community in a way that I wasn't even aware was happening, despite everything that I know about the history of gentrification and redlining. But before we get into the details, can you just tell me what inspired you to do this documentary? Because there are a lot of independent journalists on the ground who might cover these stories to some degree, but it's very rare that we see someone go into details about something as serious and as specific to Black people as gentrification, redlining, and just the overall erasure of Black people, especially in a city like Boston, where a lot of people might not even know that this happens in a city like that. They might think that Boston is probably full of Black people because it's a metro area, but it's quite the opposite at this point.
Yeah, there was a group of activists that reached out to me called the Franklin Park Defenders, and they wanted to meet with me about a current gentrification project that's happening that we discuss in the documentary. During that meeting with them, I started to realize, just hearing all their stories, I said, this probably needs to be a bigger project instead of just an interview, because I can interview you and have you come on the show and talk to people about this. But I think people need to understand what happened before this that made the gentrification so alarming and that brought us to this point. So I thought it was really important if I made this a bigger project so I can go through the history of how we got here, the present, and of course, the future. So that's actually how the events unfolded. And gentrification, I mean, I've been talking about it for a long time. even before I started the show, I made a video where I went around the city to different areas to show people the gentrification that was taking place. That was a couple of years ago, before I started Sabby Sabs podcast. So it's the gentrification that is happening in Boston is rampant. Like I've never seen it happen this fast, and to the extreme of which it is happening. And I've been here since 2011, and there was already gentrification taking place then. But over the years, it has increased, especially after the pandemic, and a lot of businesses had to close. So investors and developers, they just see this as prime real estate. And we can get into the whole like specifics about what the greater plan is as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point that you made about post-pandemic, because there had been plenty of warnings about what was happening to Black businesses, because it was Black businesses that suffered the most during the pandemic. And people were like, hey, y'all are giving out all these free grants to these corporations who don't even need the grants, forcing the Black businesses that are around still, that manage to survive, to take out loans in order to stick around. And a lot of them, couldn't afford to pay them back, or just they're like, I'm not going to fall into this trap. And they got, if they managed to survive, the area around them did it. So it didn't even matter. And these developers come in and do their thing. I mean, this is something, for those of you who don't know, me and Sabby actually lived in the same city for a while and didn't even know it, in Fayetteville, North Carolina. But I graduated from UNC at Chapel Hill, and I had no idea at the time. So gentrification was happening at the time when I was going to UNC. And people were kind of aware of it, but I wasn't aware that basically most of Franklin Street used to be Black-owned businesses.
Yep.
Like, well, half of Franklin Street that was Black-owned businesses. And this is actually very unique because Chapel Hill is actually the model for the entire country, where they've tried to build these cities around the colleges. So the college came first, and then they're like, we're going to build a city around the college. It didn't work out for the majority of the country, but for Chapel Hill, it's one of the wealthiest areas in the nation. So I learned later that it was half of Franklin Street. If y'all know Franklin Street, like, this is a busy street. It's where, if you've ever seen UNC win a national championship, like, that's where all the partying happens. It was all Black businesses. And then they just erased them, and it was done quietly in the dark. And then it started happening again. So when you're looking at Boston, you gotta wonder, how could a city that's draws so much attention, how can gentrification run rampant like this? How can redlining still, because people think that redlining is done? It's not. Like, there was a case actually in 2024 where they just settled out of court. But how could a city like Boston draw so much attention, like get away with gentrification like this, and no one seems to be being held accountable and no one's paying attention?
I think a lot of it leads to policy. Boston is kind of known as being like this progressive haven, even more so Cambridge, now also Somerville. It's kind of known for that. Massachusetts in particular, I mean, we legalized gay marriage here. We legalized marijuana. So we're kind of known for those things. So people don't think that we would have these issues, right? But I think that people have to understand there's a greater plan here. When Marty Walsh was still mayor in Boston, he kind of said it out in the open that his goal was to make Boston a place that wealthy people wanted to live in. He said that out in the open. So he wasn't shy about that. And what has been happening over the past couple of years, we are seeing a reverse white flight, where white people in the suburbs are moving back into the city.
Which is crazy.
It really is. And people like, well, why would people do that? Proximity to work. A lot of people who live here work in Boston or Cambridge. Like, that's where most of the jobs are. And
can you explain the significance of that? Because I don't think that people understand, like, all the bosses and CEOs and all, they lived right outside of Boston, and they traveled into Boston to work. And like, so it's not like New York City, where the richest people all live in the city. Or LA even, or San Francisco. It's like the opposite, or it used to be.
Right. Like, a lot of the wealthy people here in Massachusetts, they live in towns like Weston. There's a couple of Red Sox players that, like, David Ortiz lived in Weston. Weston, Lexington, Concord, Dover, Sherburne. These are the wealthy towns outside of Boston. but that commute is no joke, right? Like the traffic here is insane. It's gotten worse after the pandemic, but a lot of them work in the city. So what has been happening since the city has continued to build like luxury condos, and the mini micro unit
The
apartment.
townhomes.
Yeah, they've been
Yeah.
building those. And it's so funny because you can walk through the city and you can tell something doesn't fit here because Boston's very old. The architecture here is very old. And then you see this fancy, brand new luxury condo building right next to a building that's been there since the 1800s. It really stands out and looks awkward. But they've been moving back into the city because number one, it shortens your commute, and they have created more businesses in the city. So kind of everything that you want to do is like right there, right? So they're like, okay, we're next to the garden if we want to go to concerts, if we want to go to games. Like we're right in the center of it all. And so the goal was to make Boston this international hub of sorts where wealthy people wanted to live in. Marty
Mm.
Walsh's goal was to make Boston like the next New York. So what that means is that in order to do that, Boston's very dense, so it's not like we have a lot of land available for you to build.
True.
So they knock down what is old, even if that's people's homes, and they build what the developers want. And I
Which is
still have
ironically
struggled.
what New York did. New York did it, but they just did it way earlier. Like in a way that
Right,
no one, when no, like people tend to forget Central Park used to be an all black neighborhood,
right,
and they
right.
just erased it.
They want Boston to be a world-class city. We were asked at one point a couple years ago about hosting the Olympics in Boston, and now the residents were 100% against it because they're like, we don't have the infrastructure to maintain that. The traffic is already a mess. So Mayor
So
Marty
dope.
Walsh at that time ended up saying no because the residents were vehemently against it. But that's not off the table. That is still an option in the future. So they want Boston to be on the world stage the same way that New York City is, the same way that Los Angeles is. And over the years, what you see in this documentary is that this started long ago, right? Like Black people used to live in Beacon Hill, Black people used to live in downtown Boston. They
Mhm.
continue to remove the housing via redlining, via eminent domain. Urban renewal was an absolute mess and disaster. And that's how they were able to push Black people to the southern part of the city, which is why when you come here as a tourist, you don't see many Black people. People have to
Yeah.
understand the segregation in Boston is very distinct, and it's noticeable that if you don't go to Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, parts of Jamaica Plain, you're less likely to see us. So I've lived in a lot of different places and I've never seen that type of segregation that's so hyper the way that it is here in Boston, with the exception of Chicago. Chicago also is another example, but
Yeah.
it really stands
So
out.
it's interesting that you said Chicago because so when I went to a debate tournament at Harvard, and one of my best friends lives in Boston. So we were just hanging around the city. We went to a club, and I was like looking around. I was like, something feels off, but I can't really explain it because it's not like it's only white people here. It was actually a very, very diverse environment. But the problem was it was just like no Black people. It was like two of us or three, and the other two were like Africans. So like I'm not even sure if that counts in that particular situation. But there were no African Americans there. It was just me. I was like, yo, is this like normal? He was like, actually, yeah, it is kind of normal. Like his dad, who was half Black, moved further south. They used to live in the center of the city. His whole family did. And then over time, they either moved out completely because it was unaffordable, or they moved into more affordable areas in the outskirts of Boston. So it was in Chicago has that same distinct feeling where you're like, wow, this is the most diverse racist city I've ever been to. Like
Exactly. So people come here and they're like, well, Boston's diverse. Yeah, it's diverse, but it's still very racist. Like it really stands out. And I think that when people come here, when my friends come here for the first time, they're like, where are all the Black people? Right. And they're in Roxbury, Dorchester, they're in Mattapan. And as we get into in the documentary, we talk about like the removal of even the Black community in Roxbury to places like Brockton. And I was just contacted the other day by someone who's in Brockton, who grew up in Roxbury, who was a part of that removal, who just told me that now they're starting to gentrify Brockton and Black people there are being pushed out to Taunton, Massachusetts. So this is southeastern Mass. So again, you're pushing them further and further away from the center of where all the jobs are. So if you come here as a visitor, you're more likely to spend time in Boston proper. That's Back Bay, Beacon Hill. Cambridge is even closer to Boston proper than Roxbury and Dorchester. So you're not in the areas where a lot of Black people are. Now, how is that different from other cities? When I go to New York, when I go to DC, when I go to Philly, I see Black people downtown. And what was explained to me by residents who grew up here is that back in the day, Black people were told not to go downtown because Black people were getting beaten. They would get into fights with other people. There's pictures of this because white people at that time felt as though if you were Black and you were in downtown Boston, you were taking their jobs. So this is why even today, you don't see many Black, when you go to downtown Boston, you don't see many Black people working downtown. And that stigma, that stain is still an issue with the city. So Black people who grew up here, they kind of knew not to go into those areas. They knew not to go into Charlestown, not to go into South Boston. So we're talking about a big problem here where you don't even feel as though because of the violence, the physical violence that was present at that time, people then told their children as well, don't venture over there. The community's right here, stay here. But then now, because of the gentrification, now you have, again, a reverse white flight of white people moving out of the suburbs, moving into those communities and pushing people out once again.
And ironically, it isn't like you can have like a revert, like Black people moving to those suburbs, because I know how much some houses cost. Them houses out there are expensive. One of my friends actually lives out there, and like just to remodel her house was like the cost of a house. Like, is expensive. So you mentioned because we acknowledge like the white people had a problem with Black people coming in and taking their jobs in downtown Boston. But in the documentary, somebody is discussing how every single demographic, basically Latino, Asian, East Asian, like everybody increased the population of every. I know actually Boston has become like a weird hub for Brazilians too, which is kind of like a weird thing. Which I didn't know that in Kansas City of all places. But yeah, so how can it be that it seems like Black people are uniquely suffering? Because I mean, I don't know if it might have something to do with the fact that it's because Black people are seen as some type of unique threat because like of how they're an inherent part of Boston. The success of Boston has a lot to do with the Black migration into Boston, like back in the day. And it's like, well, no one could take advantage of Boston and all it has to offer and advocate for themselves like Black people. So it's like we have to target them. Is that what it is? Or how can it be like white people are they're scared of the Black people taking their jobs, but every other ethnicity seems to be excluded from that bias?
Well, when we talk about the other groups, for the most part, with the exception of Asian Americans, right? A lot of them are not applying for those jobs. So in Boston, you do have unique communities like East Boston, for example, is known as South American. So a lot of people from South America live in East Boston. South Boston used to be like, Irish American. There's still some of that there. But there's gentrification that has taken place there as well. Charlestown is and has been and is still historically white. So there's neighborhoods that are, this is what I meant about the hyper-segregation, the neighborhoods defined by who the people are that have lived there and continue to live there today. The problem that you run into, and when we go back through the history, and this was something I discovered making this documentary, I didn't know for the longest time that during the time when Irish Americans were in power in those city jobs, they prevented Black people from getting those jobs. So Black people were not allowed to be police officers. They weren't allowed to work in the schools, especially not the white schools during that point in time. They weren't allowed to, drive the school buses. One of the women that is in the documentary, Antonia, her mother was the first Black school driver. They were shut out of city jobs. So what people have to understand is that Irish Americans at that time, they held on to city jobs and they were in power for a long time. It wasn't until Mayor Menino won the mayor race that was the first time that that was broken. So we're talking like what, 90s with Mayor Menino. So that's how long it took for that disruption there to take place. So we had no power. We were in no
That's
position
very
of
unique
power.
too for Irish to have that much power in an entire city, because
Yeah.
it's unique because they were discriminated against so much. So you would think
Yeah.
that they would sympathize with Black people, but instead it's like they had a overcorrection. They're like, no, we have to protect it from any and everybody who isn't Irish.
Exactly. No, you'll end up looking down on the other group. And that has happened historically throughout time, right? And so I think what people have to understand is one of the things that Do Dissidents asked me, they said, why don't we hear about like the Black culture and entertainment industry? Like, why don't we hear about that in reference to Boston? Because Chicago is hyper segregated, but you still hear about like the Black culture scene. And again, it's because we were not in those positions to elevate that. Like they didn't want Black people working in the press. Like we weren't in the positions to elevate what was there. And you go back and you look at things like New Edition was really popular, during the 80s. They were selling out everywhere they went. But you didn't hear as much about them being pushed out in Boston as you did New Kids on the Block, which came later. So that's the racism that you see that's on full display. And a lot of times it's not overt racism, which is what I was used to seeing in the South, is covert racism, and it's structural. So this isn't unique to Boston, the way that Black people were pushed out of the cities and are still being pushed out. If you look at Detroit, if you look at Milwaukee, San Francisco was probably the best example where they decided to run highways through Black neighborhoods. And oftentimes these highways weren't even built, but they tore down the housing because they wanted to put a highway through Black neighborhoods, and Black people were displaced. And so, and then you see this today.
That happened to my family in San Francisco. They all lived in San Francisco, and they were just kind of like kicked out or forced out, basically. But they all ended up still working in San Francisco because that's where all the money was. So, just like Boston, that commute is no joke.
Yeah.
So,
and then on top of that, I think another thing people need to realize, the gentleman in the documentary, Rod Sterling, like his family was displaced, and his family actually owned their home during that time. But when the city came in via eminent domain and said, we are demolishing all of these homes because we're going to put a highway here that was never built, by the way, they didn't get what was owed for their house. Like, it's not like the city said, we're going to pay you X amount of dollars because this is what your house is worth so that you can buy a house elsewhere. No, they tore down the house, gave them basically an apartment voucher, pushed them into Marksdale Gardens apartments and said, you can have this. So they actually came in and stole generational wealth. And this is what people need to understand. Everything that you see happening right now in the West Bank, where the settlers go in and they demolish Palestinians' homes, people need to understand that happened here. That happened right here in the United States, and it's still happening. And so I really need people to make that connection between the geopolitics and the domestic politics here right at home. It's not just happening in the West Bank. It happened right here at home. Where do people think that they got it from? Where do you think they got the idea from?
Yeah, I mean, people really don't understand, like, the number one way to accrue wealth is and has always been real estate. It's always been that. Like, that is like the root of, I mean, one of the reasons that, so in the 1920s, like the roaring 20s that everybody brags about, Black banks actually survived the crash that came after, because while everybody else is gambling with money, Black banks were making smart investments, not making risky bets, and were keeping housing affordable. And then it wasn't just like the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Like what happened with at the start of the 20s, they were whenever these race wars started, they weren't going after people's homes. They were actually going after the business districts. They destroyed the business districts, the banks, all the things that Black people needed to continue building up their communities, even in spite of segregation. The Black people didn't, I mean, they might have had a problem with segregation in the sense that some laws prevented them from engaging in the economy the way they would like, but even through segregation, they were still winning, and it was a problem. There's there's a very good chance, Sabs, that, and I still believe this with all my heart and soul. So we don't know basically anything about the bank in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There's not even a deed for this bank that was that in Greenwood. For those of you who don't know, like that's where the Tulsa race massacre happened. Like there's nothing, and it's probably because at the time they were about to start the Fed. They literally, I think 6 months after that massacre happened, they did the national, what is it called? The National Bank, basically. They did the Tulsa, Oklahoma branch. It was like 6 months later. And basically, if the national budget had to keep up, if the Black national budget in their banks could keep up with the actual US national budget, they couldn't play with these interest rates the way that they do. They couldn't play with loans the way that they do. They couldn't discriminate the way that they could discriminate. And it goes even deeper. It goes back into geopolitics. Every time if the US wanted to help fund a war, guess what Black people could do if they organize? They could help fund the revolution against whatever the empire is trying to do. Like all of this is interconnected, and whatever's happening in like the West Bank, South Africa, a lot of the times it's happened here already. Not even just happened, it's already happened. It's just that nobody knows about it. Like that, the number one cause of divorce is what? Usually money.
Yeah.
Right? If people can't afford to invest because they can't take out a second mortgage on their home or even buy their home because of redlining, like the finances suffer. There's more arguments. There's less time with family. Homes get broken up, and everything else follows. It's scary how much all this is linked, and then people be like, did they just look at the conclusion and be like, oh no, it's just an inherent problem in their community? No, it's an inherent problem with the government. Motherfucker, like it's all here. The history is here. Well, except for in the case of Boston, which by the way, can you speak a little bit about the fact that at one point there was a woman in the documentary that said when you go look up photos of historically Black images, where Black people used to live, the activities they participated in, the way they contribute to the community, they are literally erased from the internet?
Yeah, that was the hardest part about making this documentary. And that was very shocking to me that it was very hard to find photos, videos of Black Boston during that time, during civil rights movement and before that, almost as if that never happened. So like when I was in school and I learned about the Great Migration, the cities that are often mentioned are Chicago, Detroit. Black people moved from the South to these cities, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, etc. Boston was never mentioned. And even here, it was very hard to find. And so during my research, what I found was that Northeastern University, somehow they were able to get ownership of a lot of the historical photos of the Black community during that time. So they have a whole collection that you can sit and go through, which I did. And it's just really interesting to me how Northeastern University is part of the gentrification in Roxbury. They're part of the reason why Black people are losing their homes there, but they're the ones that own the pictures of the history. It's I'm going to go into a whole conversation about that, but it was very hard to find it. So I had to I had to go to Northeastern University, go through their archives. I had to contact the Boston Globe because the Boston Globe owns a lot of the busing photos that is shown through the documentary. I had to reach out to residents and ask them, do you have any pictures of you like at Franklin Park, like during back in the day? And so that in itself was like a part-time job, just trying to get that information. So again, it's like they're trying to erase the history as if Black people didn't really contribute to Boston. That's very, very strange to me. And so you do see that and you feel it as a part of present day, even with the current mayor that we have in Boston, Mayor Wu. Her priority is not specifically on the Black community, right? Like she does speak a lot about immigration. She talks a lot about, how she's against like ICE and what they are doing. But when it comes in particular to the Black community, she ain't really advocating for Black people here like that. Like, and it's so obvious. And people ask, well, why did she just win re-election? Well, the person who was running against her, Josh Kraft, who isn't any better, by the way, he's the son of billionaire Robert Kraft. He dropped out. And then there was an independent that was running against her, but oftentimes people continue to vote for the person who's already there. And she was one who made a lot of promises when it came to the housing situation. That was her number one thing, that she was going to fix the housing issue. And she's actually implemented policies and allowed developers to come in to make the situation worse. So people have to understand these affordable housing units that are being built aren't affordable. A lot of these buildings are vacant. And like Mayor Wu doesn't tell you that, right? Like the corporate media doesn't tell you that. If you don't live here and actually know people in those areas, then you wouldn't know that either. You think people are, a lot of these buildings are vacant. So there's that. Affordable housing nowadays has just become a gimmick. It doesn't mean that it's affordable.
Come on,
It's just a
scam for
word.
developers. It's like, hey, tell them we're going to build
Yeah.
affordable housing, give us a contract, like give us some exclusive contracts to build here. And even better yet, how about you give us some money from the city? Have the taxpayers
Right.
pay the houses they can't afford.
Right. And like she'll do things that I consider to be virtue signaling. Like she gave New Edition their own day. Like that's nice. But again, like I said, when I went to that event where New Edition was given their own day and there was a street named after them. What was interesting is a lot of the people who came to that event grew up in Orchard Park, but they lost, again, their homes were demolished. They don't even live there. A lot of them live in Brockton and Taunton. So it's just, it's a slap in the face that you are actively removing Black people from the city. And the data shows we're the ones that are decreasing here. Other groups are increasing. So just along with Marty Walsh, they really want Boston to be an international city. And so the policies that are being implemented, a lot of those policies benefit those, along with Governor Maura Healey, it benefits those who have immigrated here. They just announced that they are giving money and housing to people who immigrated here, to those who are a part of the migrant community. But they're not doing that for Black communities. They're actively removing Black people. So it's so obvious.
I have a question for you. So the sports fan in me, I'm a big Jaylen Brown fan. I've actually maintained since both of them were drafted that Jaylen Brown has actually been better than Jason Tatum. And I've always found that it was weird that the team tried to elevate Jason Tatum as the best player when a lot of fans were either unsure or like, no, we've been watching and it's definitely Jaylen Brown. But then you actually look into Jaylen Brown's history, like how extremely intelligent he is. And then like when he was the first one to receive the $400 million contract, the first thing he said is, yeah, I want to build a Black Wall Street in Boston, which I'm sure, given everything that's on that, that's the first thing I thought about. I'm like, wow. Yeah, he got, y'all, I don't know if people remember, but like when they announced that they were going to pay him, people started going crazy. The media started attacking him. And if y'all understand how these contracts and how the NBA works, this is an all NBA team defense champion, or at the time conference champion, and then eventually a champion. Like there's no discussion or debate to be had. He's the next up. And it was like once he mentioned that and people started doing their research, it seemed like the attacks just started getting out of hand, and they were becoming personal and really had nothing to do with his game, in no context with the fact that he was the best defensive player at one point, and definitely, between him and Tatum, the best offensive player. So like, what's the problem? Who if you don't give him that $400 million, somebody else gonna give him 300, and you're gonna be pissed later. So why is it such a big deal? Do you feel like Jaylen Brown advocating on behalf of Black people, constantly talking about how he wants to uplift Black people financially in the community, give people access to financial literacy in Boston? Like, do you feel like that rubbed people the wrong way in the city?
Absolutely. Number one, Jaylen Brown doesn't have the complexion for the protection. Like people can't ignore that Jaylen Brown, he's darker skinned. Jason Tatum he's biracial. He's very, light skinned. But the moment that Jaylen Brown said that he wanted to build a Black Wall Street in Boston, oh, of course. Absolutely. Of course. Anytime you advocate and say you want to do something specifically for Black people, they really not trying to mess with you in that type of way. He's also pro-Palestine. Yes. And that's another issue, right? So yeah, they figured out who they wanted to elevate, and that's who they go with. And that's the media. That's a big part of that. And it's unfortunate. But I think that why not? Like, why not have him build like a Black Wall Street again? Because that means that you would be competing with the white businesses downtown, and you would be competing with real estate investors. And real estate, for those who are not aware, can be very racist. So
A little bit.
they're not trying to work with, no matter how much money Jaylen Brown got, they ain't really trying to work with Black people like that in real estate.
Yeah, but it's crazy to me because it's almost silly that they would reject this idea, because Jaylen Brown being who he is, how much money NBA players, like especially the ones who have started to get these $350 million, $400 million contracts, they're looking to invest their money. They're looking to be owners. They're looking to invest in a Wall Street, Silicon Valley type of situation. And if Jaylen Brown with this, because he's going to get probably another $400 million contract. He's probably going to get another one, close to $450 million. He's going to be a billionaire before he retires. And if not from an NBA contract, just because he's so ridiculously intelligent, why would you not? These NBA players and athletes in general, but specifically NBA players, they give they're like, hey man, you should come over here and invest. Hey man, you should come over here and invest. I'm starting a business here. We're starting to do investments here. I'm investing in this tech company here. And he would bring that business. Like the other NBA players love Jaylen Brown. Like, why would you not let him bring that money to the city if your goal is truly to become international and become one of the most financially successful cities and attractive cities in the world? Like that, because a billionaire Black athlete starting Black Wall Street would actually help you create that outcome. And you're screwing yourself, basically, is because Black people, we've seen how Boston does its Black athletes, y'all. Like, while you're on top, you're on top. But you could be Gordon Hayward. We saw Isaiah Thomas gave his heart and soul to the Celtics. Everybody thought that team was supposed to be trash. And 5'9" IT comes in, saves them, takes to the playoffs, get injured, and they don't even give him time to recuperate. Gordon Hayward plays not even 1/4 of a game. They gave this man what, 2-3 years? 2-3 years to figure it out? And he never was the same.
That goes back to the racism again. It's like people forget that all those years that Bill Russell was winning those championships with the Celtics, Bill Russell faced a lot of racism. Bill Russell's house was broken into multiple times, where people wrote like racist like slurs in his house. People defecated on his family bed. These are the kind of things that they don't talk about. So like, yeah, they built a statue here to honor Bill Russell, but they don't tell you about what Bill Russell went through during that time. So that's something that people have to keep in mind. But no, they don't want Black people to have wealth. They don't want you to really build anything. And people ask, well, why is it that way for Black people and not for other groups in particular? Well, I would argue they don't really want them to have, wealth either. But the difference is that they're less likely to talk about what they're owed and what is due. They're less likely to talk about that, right? When slaves came to the United States, they didn't come here to be anything other than property. They didn't come here voluntarily. They were forced here. So that mentality, which this country never really fully apologized for and never really repaired what was done to slaves and their descendants, Jim Crow, redlining, all these things, this country never repaired that. So if you never repaired it, you never really came to a place of healing. Mm-hmm. So that mentality. Exactly. It would be, and I want people to think about this, like, again, everything that's happened in Gaza and the West Bank, look at the way the Israelis look at the Palestinians. Even the Palestinians that live in Israel, they look down on them too. They have apartheid against them too. Because again, they don't see them as part of the future plan. They don't want them to have wealth. They don't want them to grow. They don't want them to succeed. So until people address the historic things that happen in this country, we will constantly butt heads about this issue as to why we are treated this way and why things are the way that they are.
Yeah. And we have to address them in a substantive manner because, like you said, what we see now is that, like, because of social media, they have no choice but to address some things, but it's just virtual signaling. Like, I'm glad that we finally acknowledge Juneteenth. I'm glad that we talk about the Tulsa massacre. Like, but it's also pretty insane that, like, they didn't actually acknowledge the Tulsa massacre until what, like 5 or 6 years ago? Like, it wasn't a thing. Like, nobody talked about it. And this was like, oh, okay. Like, is it because it wasn't that important of a city? Oh, no, it was actually the wealthiest Black city in the history of the country, in the history of the Americas, actually. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, that's kind of weird then. Is it though? Is it weird that they didn't talk about the wealthiest Black city and the fact that they were the wealthiest despite all the segregation? Because then what happens if you start doing the research? This is what always happens to me. I almost get overwhelmed because whenever I learn something like that, I start doing more research. And then the more you dig, the more you figure out how much effort was put into hiding these stories, into suppressing Black people's success, into basically erasing history. Like, there's like a concerted effort, and it goes back to what you said. It's because there might not be another group who feels that they are entitled to more as far as reconciliation is concerned than Black people. And there's also not another group that's more equipped to fight for it. If they really were equipped with the knowledge and the just the unity really across the nation, because it can't just be because I think Black people in the South have this conception that their issues are different than maybe the ones in Boston. Like they Southern Black people, Caribbeans, the diaspora, like everybody feel like their problems are different. But really, when it comes down to it, once you've been here long enough, you realize, we actually kind of going through the same shit. Like, even if you're Caribbean, guess what? You just got brought into the fold. The moment you step foot on this continent, you just got brought into the fold. Welcome to the party. So we really have to, like you said, address substantively what has happened so that we can move forward as a nation. Because you can make a legitimate argument that a lot of the reason that our nation is crumbling, is collapsing, is because of a general unwillingness to deal with our history. We keep like this issue with Venezuela. How can anyone believe that this is about drug trafficking? And if we go to war, if you remember Vietnam, how can you think we're going to win? How can you think that? And when we lose, how can you think our economy is going to bounce back? Nothing about that situation makes sense. And yet there are still people that will defend it. And we're going to go ahead.
I think that, people have to realize that we have a lot of issues in this country. And at the same time, we're destroying other countries. We haven't even fixed our stuff here. We continue to hear politicians complain about China, complain about Russia, complain about all these other countries when we don't have our shit together.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have it right here. We have a homelessness rate that continues to increase. We have young people that can't come up with a down payment to buy a home because private equity is basically taking over the housing market. We don't have it right. We really don't. And to me, it's just like, I think that some people are starting to see it now because I think Trump has been a disappointment to even some of his own supporters. But I think the reality is that people need to get outside of their bubble. A lot of times the problem we have here in the US is a lot of people think, well, everything's working great for me. I worked hard and I got a house and I got this, etc. So if you can't get those things, then it must be something wrong with you. No, like there are things that have happened and continue to happen in this country. And that's why it's falling apart. Listen, empires don't last forever. Rome is the greatest example. You get to the top, you rise, and then you eventually fall. So it was only a matter of time. And our government never took care of the people right here. Our infrastructure is falling apart, but we want to complain that China has these fancy bridges. We could have had fancy bridges too. We could have healthcare for everybody, like in this country, but
we could have had electric cars for $13,000 too. But no,
exactly.
You give all the money to Tesla, let them keep fucking up, and then not have any competition. So now y'all stuck with shitty $100,000 electric cars.
Exactly. And you look around, our infrastructure is crumbling, bridges are falling apart, but where's all the money going? And that's the question they don't really want to ask, right? We have a defense budget that's over $800 billion. It's just insane. It's continued to increase over the years. They haven't invested in this country. And my warning to people is just look, if you have the opportunity to live abroad, take that opportunity. You can always come back. If you don't like it, you can always come back. But take that opportunity so you can see how people live abroad, so you can see the difference and you make your comparisons, you know? But I tell people, if you have the opportunity to move and you want to try it out, go try it out.
Hey, y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took that opportunity and it worked out great. You know why? Because I'll give you the best example I can think of. Well, one, I was able to buy my first house. And it was kind of ridiculous because I didn't even realize, like, I didn't even think about buying a house while I was still in the US because I had already gotten rid of the idea that it was possible. It was like, yeah, I'm not buying a house. You out of your damn mind. Because even if I could afford the house in the mortgage, these property taxes, if not this year, one of these years is going to kick my ass. And they're going to come and get my house anyway. I'm never going to own this house. Never. In Brazil, it's not the case. The property taxes, I pay $20 a month in property taxes. That's how much I pay. And it might go up over the next 6-7 years by like $2 because they have limits on how much they can raise their property taxes. Like my wife, when she gave birth to my first son, it was free. Everything was free. Everything. I'm talking, Sab, in the hospital, if you can't afford it, right? So if the mom is going to be working and doesn't have the ability to breastfeed as long as they would like, and they know they're going to start their kid off on formula, the hospital provides you formula for like 3 or 4 months, and they give you diapers. Wow. Yeah, they even give you like the baby towel, like the burp towels. If you don't have any. Yeah, they give baby little hats to cover their heads. Yeah, all that for free. I was like, "Man, you sure we don't have to pay anything on the way out?" Because she's like, "No, this is like they have private hospital, but she's like, no, this is all free." I was like, "Are you sure?" Because I'm not trying to get hit like that mails. She's like, "No, it's free," and lo and behold, it surely was. Like it's obviously Brazil's not perfect, but what's crazy about like a place like Brazil is like when I'm consciously aware of how much the United States has to do with the fact that the Brazilian healthcare system or the government isn't as functional as it could be. And yet the healthcare system is still better than the US, even though the US is holding it back actively. So imagine like a place like China where the US can't interfere because China has become so powerful now. Like there are people who have had chances to move there and are wildly successful because they had the opportunity without somebody holding them back.
Yep. That part right there. And that's the thing. So it's like, and then we hear people, they're complaining, politicians complain, people aren't having more kids, etc. Like you want them to have kids, they can't even afford to put a down payment on a house. So that is the state of the United States of America today. And I don't see that getting better until we get corporate money out of electoral politics. I don't see it getting better until we stop putting money towards all these wars and start investing in our country right here at home. And a lot of people talk about this when they're running for office. They all talk a good game, but once they get in, they end up doing the same thing that their predecessors did. So at the end of the day, this country is becoming a place for those who have money. And for those who don't,
they are money, by the way, because just back in the day, 150,000. Oh, he was balling. 150,000 now. Yeah, okay. You're welcome to the middle class, buddy.
Yeah,
if he didn't exist anymore. But
I mean, even for me, like I said, had it not been for the pandemic, because during the pandemic, the interest rates were extremely low if you were trying to buy a home, and had it not been for the help of my parents, I would still be renting.
Yeah, my brother was able to use his VA loan. The interest rates dropped, and then people that were trying to sell their homes, like they were getting kind of desperate because people were getting PCS in the middle of the pandemic. It was crazy, actually, but that's the only reason he was able to get his home. And he was like, yeah, no, if I had to buy a home now, like, I don't know how that would happen. Even with the
Yeah.
VA loan, because you still got to put down that percentage.
Yeah, that's what stops a lot of people is the down payment, because if you can't come up with, and I went through the first time home buyer program, but even that requires a down payment. You still have to
Exactly.
come up with it. It's not cheap. I mean, it's like
Don't
it's
even get me
so,
started about actually putting stuff in the goddamn house. Like, you forget, like, oh shit, I gotta put stuff in here now. What?
and that definitely takes time. Like
Like, my
that's
bill
one of
don't
those
just stop
things
whenever I bought a home. Y'all don't give me like a 2-month, break before. Nope. The bill start coming immediately.
that can take
it's
a couple
crazy.
years. So it's like, yeah, it's crazy.
Sabs, so for everybody who hasn't seen it, I did put the documentary in the description. I strongly urge everybody, if you have not watched it yet, go watch it. It is a very powerful documentary. Once again, I got to give you my congratulations because it was so well put together. And I am fully aware of just how crazy your schedule as a content creator is, and to be able to do this while simultaneously keeping up with the Sabby Sabs show and doing such a fantastic job. Shout out to you and everybody who helped put it together. It's great, and I really hope that it opens people's eyes to just because if this can happen in a place like Boston, and really I didn't know how bad it was in Boston until you did this documentary. Imagine how deep this goes and how many other cities are affected by this. As I said, you look at Oakland. People don't even talk about Oakland anymore. Like, it used to be predominantly Black. Then it was kind of like condemned, and then white people moved in. Like that happened in Oakland. Nobody really talks about it. And so I'm hoping that this gives people an opportunity to see just how sinister like your government and these corporations can be, how local government is failing its constituents, because once again, I've just noticed the history and the patterns that if you are against Black people in your community will fail. If not now, eventually. It happens over and over and over again. So other than that, Sabs, tell people where they can find you at.
Yeah, you guys can find me on YouTube or at Sabby Sabs, and you can find me at Revolutionary Blackout Network.
Awesome. Is there anywhere else that they can find the documentary other than YouTube? I put the YouTube link in the description, but is there anywhere else?
Right now, it's just on YouTube, and that may be for a limited time because we're starting the process to enter some of the film festivals, and so depending on depending on which ones we end up applying to, they all have different requirements and different rules. So some of them have rules that you can't have it public within a certain amount of time before the festival date. So if you haven't seen it, make sure that you watch it because it'll probably be there for a limited time, and then you'll be able to see it again on YouTube after the festivals.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I'm sure I'm gonna win a lot of rewards. Is there anybody that you want to give a shout out to that kind of helped you out with the documentary that you want to show some love?
Yes. Oh my gosh. My editor, Scott Hanshew, who reached out to me when he heard me talking about like doing a documentary on my show. He has been phenomenal, and he was able to elevate this in a way that I could not have imagined. So a lot of the editing skills that you see, that's Scott Hanshew. And I highly recommend him for anyone who's looking for an editor for their documentary.
Shout out to Scott, man. Yeah, the editing was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. So everybody, thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of For the People podcast. Make sure y'all like this video, share, subscribe. You can support the show by becoming a premium subscriber here on YouTube, joining us on Patreon as a premium subscriber, or liking and sharing the video. That helps out a lot as well. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, check out Sabby Sabs' documentary on her YouTube channel before she ends up at a film festival getting 50,000 awards and it becomes expensive to see. His Netflix, hopefully we get to see a Netflix deal. And other than that, always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.